Leadership. Leadership is one of the most studied and researched phenomenon of all times. It goes back centuries, and it's often a confusing topic. What makes for a great leader? Why do some people succeed in leadership and others fail? And this is a question that has plagued mankind for years. And so we're going to talk today about what are some leadership theories that have evolved over time so that we can begin our MBA 500 leadership course with the proper mindset about what makes for an effective leader. Leadership over the years has cultivated theories. And what is a theory? It's nothing more than a coherent group of tested general propositions that most commonly regard as correct, and they can be used as principles of explanation and prediction for a class of phenomenon. For example, Einstein's theory of relativity. Einstein, by the way, was a fantastic leader in many ways, but one in particular is the fact that he is often quoted as saying that he believed that imagination was more important than knowledge. And imagination, that forward-looking vision, is something that leaders all across the ages and spectrum have followed. So what we want to do in this course is think about those general principles, the theories behind leadership, and then put them into practice in this course and throughout all of the MBA courses till we finally get to our strategy capstone course. The great man theory. This is the original theory that goes back some time, and it was attributed to the Scottish philosopher Thomas Carlyle. And even though this photo here is a young lady, a little baby, we know that Thomas Carlyle believed that the history of the world is but a biography of great men. And he believed that the few and the powerful and the famous is what shape our collective identity. Now, this has historical roots in the aristocracy, and those individuals that were part of the aristocracy were naturally more born to lead because others, even though they may have been just as talented and capable, they did not have the same opportunity in life. So even though this is a historical idea that a great man or a great woman, so women are included in this category, they are people that are born leaders. It's sort of genetic. They inherited the leadership attributes in order to make them effective leaders. They also, according to Carlyle, they are gifted with some sort of divine inspiration and the right characteristics, such as charisma. You've heard about charisma before, but charisma is this notion, it is based on the Greek word of calling it a gift. Charisma is a gift. So a natural leader has that charismatic presence that kind of pulls you into his or her leadership style. And they are recognized for that. So that theory it calls for qualities like commanding personality, charm, courage, assertiveness or aggressiveness, and persuasiveness. But these individuals are born with this, according to the great man theory. Well, we move on from this idea of the great man or great woman theory. Your leadership, you're born as a leader, leaders are not made. But believe it or not, those theories are still around today where we think, oh, someone was born to lead. However, what has been evolved is more of the idea of a trait. What are the traits that leaders have? And can we cultivate traits to be more effective? A trait can be thought of as a relatively stable characteristic or characteristics that cause individuals to behave in a certain way. However, there are some weaknesses to the idea of a trait theory, and because the main criticism is if you think about people's traits and their personality traits, you could see that somebody may have certain traits, but that doesn't always mean that that predicts their behavior. And so that makes it a little more complex. Again, the great man or great woman theory was we are born as leaders and we're either a leader or we're not. The trait theory is, no, wait a minute. We can cultivate some stable characteristics of traits. We can learn specific kinds of traits, like the trait of being kind or the trait of being forceful. We can learn those traits and we can cultivate those traits. However, doesn't mean we're always going to behave in those ways, even though we've cultivated them. So that would be a problem. Now here is a slide of some noted effective leadership traits. And so let's start. Integrity. That means you keep your word. You do what you say you're going to do. And throughout all of history, and even in our research with the Leadership Challenge, we see integrity or keeping your word, being honest, is still a #1 important trait for leaders. Flexibility. Again, that is a trait we can develop. There are people that aren't flexible whatsoever, but they can take classes to learn to be more flexible, but then their behavior may not always show that because their personality is not of that type. So this is a little problem. Sensitivity to others. Intelligence, and again, that's what we've always known that we are born with, and our IQ. However, research tells us that that can be cultivated. Our knowledge can be expanded. And then we have emotional intelligence or EQ. Stability, a person that is consistent, stable in their actions. Self-confidence, is that born? Are you born with self-confidence? Or is self-confidence something that you cultivate over time because of your successes and because of your failures and your ability to overcome them? Dominance, that might be a trait of an effective leader. Well, certainly, sometimes an effective leader has to dominate, has to take charge. So you have to have that in part of your complex of traits and characteristics. And then high energy. We don't think of a leader as someone who is, always needing to take a nap or taking a snooze or something. So that is a trait that maybe it's inborn, but maybe it's something that has to be cultivated. And I saved the last part, the internal locus of control, to talk a little bit about that, because there are two ways that we can see our world, and that is through an internal locus of control or through an external locus of control. If we have an internal locus of control, we say when we are presented with challenges and circumstances, an internal locus of control person says, look, I'm handed this circumstance, this bad thing happened to me today, but I, through my own personal agency, my own power, my own thought processes, my own motivation, I can figure this out. I can get around this in some way. So leaders typically are very strong with their internal locus of control. In locus would center, so they think that they are controlling the horizontal and vertical of their lives. If you have someone, before I say this, I do want to back up and say most CEOs, when there's survey research done about successful CEOs in Fortune 500 companies, they tend to have an internal locus of control. A problem comes to them, a challenge, they then say they can figure their way out of it. External locus of control is when the individual said, I don't have control over the situation. It's my boss. It is the government. It's my professor. So individuals that see that others are controlling them versus themselves, they tend not to have some of the traits necessary for leadership, according to the leadership theory. Thank you for joining our mini review. So the concepts and terms presented here were theory, principles that predict. And we're going to use theory in order to practice. So we're always going to have those principles first. And then we talked about the great man or woman leadership theory. Leaders are born according to that theory. And then the leadership trait theory, that there are certain traits that make for more effective leaders, and we can certainly cultivate those traits. However, our traits don't always predict how we're really going to behave. That will be a behavioral theory we'll get to in another segment. And then what are effective leadership traits? What are the things that we talked about, such as having integrity, having dominance perhaps? And then we also focused on the concept of internal versus external locus of control. If you have internal locus control, you think that no matter what happens to you, you are controlling your own life. You make your own choices, your decisions, and you have your own thought. That's having free agency. And CEOs are more likely to have internal versus external, where you think that others are controlling your life. Internal locus of control and external locus of control, locus being center. Thank you very much, and I hope you took away something from this leadership program.